So the topic of the webinar today is the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution. It's a version of Drupal that's been optimized mostly for use by the Government of Canada, but it also has a lot of useful features that other organizations might find useful. So if you are working for an organization that needs a website that's bilingual and accessible and responsive, then this might be a great tool for you, a great place to start. So I'll talk today about what this distribution is, and I'll also talk about how you can customize it for your needs. So I'll try and give you a bit of a sense of what it would take to take this distribution and actually use it in your organization. So before I start the presentation, I'll give you a bit of background about Evolving Web. So we're a Drupal consulting and development company, and we also have a Drupal training program. We help different types of organizations build Drupal websites. We've worked for government, but also academic organizations and in different corporations. So we've worked on a lot of different types of Drupal sites. And we do public training in Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, and we also do private Drupal trainings. So to start off the presentation today, what is the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution? This distribution with this big long name, what is it all about? And at its simplest, this distribution, this package that you can use to make a website, it's a combination of two major components, the Web Experience Toolkit and Drupal core. And the Web Experience Toolkit is a set of tools for making websites that are following certain standards of accessibility and bilingualism and responsiveness and other best practices. And Drupal core is a system used by different organizations all over the world for making websites that are backed by a content management system. So the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution combines these two things into one so that you get all the front-end components of the Web Experience Toolkit and all the back-end components of Drupal. And I'll talk about these two major components to explain what role each one plays. So first of all, the Web Experience Toolkit. It's also known as WetKit or WebEx, WXT or WET. So it goes by all these different names, but all those things mean the same thing, Web Experience Toolkit. And what that is it's a set of files that define the markup of a site and other front-end components like the JavaScript that gets loaded on a website or the CSS. It also has a lot of guidelines for the visual interface of the site. So there's a lot there. If you haven't looked at this before, I really recommend going to the website. It's wetbow, wet-boew.github.io. And that has all sorts of documentation about this toolkit. And the benefits of using this is that it follows accessibility standards. So for any government website or even academic website or government websites at different levels of government that need to follow accessibility standards, this is a great guide for that. It also follows responsive design guidelines. So if your website needs to work not just on a big monitor, but also on tablets and mobile phones, then this tool will give you the features you need for that as well. So there's lots that this toolkit has that you'll need to implement any of these types of websites. Drupal, on the other hand, is a system for managing content, managing users. It's a very flexible system that can be used to build many types of websites. So not just websites for government, but also websites for corporations, for communities, for e-commerce websites, all different types of websites. So it's a very flexible system. And you can use it to manage content, but it also has a lot of other features that come with it. So it has a menu system, so you can put your content in a menu so users can navigate through a website. It has a user management tool set built in, so you can create users. Users can log into the site and do different actions depending on what type of user they are. You can categorize your content with taxonomy terms. You can search for your content. So there's a lot of features that are built into Drupal that are useful for any website. And certainly this applies to government websites as well. So I'll just check if there's any questions so far. Does anyone have questions about what the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit is? No? Okay. Move on to the next section. So before I go more into what this distribution looks like as a system that you download, that you install, I want to talk about what features it actually gives you, because it's kind of good to see the overall picture first, to see what a website like this can do. So I'll talk about some of the major features. There's a lot more there behind the scenes, a lot of tools for website administrators and for users. But I'll start off with the major features of the site just to give you an idea of what this can look like. So in terms of content management, any modern website needs a system for creating different types of content and allowing authors to come onto the site and update the content. And content management is a huge part of the Drupal system, of what Drupal core gives you. So like any other system, the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution gives you a way to create and edit and delete content. So when you're logged into a website that's running on this system and you're an author or you're an administrator, if you have permission to manage the content, you'll see that you can view content, but you can also translate it and edit it and delete it as you're going through the site. So there's all these tools built in for managing content, and it really goes beyond just creating and deleting and editing content, which are the most basic content management features. There's also version management built into Drupal, so you can have different revisions of content, and you can review the revisions before they get published. You can also have drafts of your content, so you can create a new draft and then it can go through a whole publication workflow before it gets published. One of the main reasons that people use Drupal or started using Drupal 5-10 years ago is because it has a very sophisticated system for managing content types. So content management is great, but what you really want to be able to do on your site is manage the type of content that you have. And every website has content that's slightly different. Even a really simple content, or even a really simple website, is going to have lots of types of content. So by default, with this distribution, you get pages and documentation as two types of content. And these different types of content have different fields that you can manage. So a page has a title and a body and an image field, and pages get listed on the home page of the website. Whereas documentation, you have slightly different fields. You only have a title and a body, and they're not listed on the home page. So they're treated a bit differently, and they have content that's a bit different. And as you design your own site, as you customize this distribution for your organization, you're going to think of all kinds of other types of content that you want to communicate or that you want to publish on the website. So you might have events and news items. You might have profiles of different people in your organization. There's lots of other types of content that you might need to manage. So for example, an event content type might have more information like a date field and a location field, and they might be listed on all kinds of other places on the website, like an events landing page. So creating all these different types of content, this is something you can do in Drupal, and it's something that you can definitely do in the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution. This distribution also has a WYSIWYG editor built in, so editors can add markup to content in a visual way. So WYSIWYG editor that stands for what you see is what you get. So instead of having to write HTML by hand, you can use an editor to help you write the HTML. And this system uses an editor called the CK editor. It's used in a lot of online publishing tools. And it's very customizable, so you can change what buttons different administrators have access to. So as they're going through and editing the content, they can use these buttons to put in lists and make certain words bold, or add images, add links to the text, all those types of things. Along with just creating and editing, deleting content, there's a whole moderation workflow built into this system. So you can imagine that creating a new page on a website could have lots of different steps. There could be lots of people involved in that. So every time you create a new page, you might want to translate the page before it gets published. Then it goes through the publishing process. Then you might make an update to the page later on. And you might have somebody who has to review that as a draft before the draft actually gets published again. So there's this whole workflow that tends to be specific to the organization that's running the website. So there's different people involved in different organizations in publishing content online. And so you might have translators involved, you might have an author, an editor, and then the final person who gets to click the button to publish the content, who takes responsibility for that. So there's a workflow built into the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, but this workflow is very flexible. So if your workflow is different than this, you can add in different types of users into the system. You can change how content transitions from one phase to another. Maybe instead of just drafts and published content, you have other types of statuses for your content as well. So whatever your system, whatever your workflow is, you can customize this system to meet that. And you'll have users logging in who can see a list of drafts of content or content that they need to review before it gets published. If you have translators, you could create lists of content that needs to be translated, so needs their translation skills. So that interface might look something like this. And then there's also tools for reviewing changes to content. using a tool like this, so you can see what has actually changed if an author's gone in and made an update to the site. And that makes it easier to have more sophisticated workflows on the site for publishing content. I've mentioned a few things about multilingual features and bilingual content, and at the core of this system is the fact that all the content and all the user interface needs to be able to be bilingual, because if this system is going to be used for government or Canadian government websites, everything needs to be in both official languages. So the bilingual support is very important. And bilingual support happens at each level of configuration, user interface, content. You are able to make everything bilingual. And there's a language switcher that you can use on the front end to switch the language. Bilingual support is also important for the back end of the website, because you might have administrators who speak English or French and need to be able to switch back and forth. So this bilingual support works on the back end as well. Same on the back end as on the front end. So usually bilingual requirements include being able to translate the user interface of the site, so things like form elements. Also being able to translate the content. Obviously, each page needs to be in both languages. And you would also need to be able to translate configuration elements. So if you have a menu item or if you have a taxonomy term, those are also things that you need to be able to translate. And translation support for all of these things is built into the system. The translation support is a fairly complex component of this system, so it's not always the most obvious thing. There is support for translating all of these elements, but sometimes you're translating them in really different places, and it can take a lot of training to learn how to do the translation and how to translate each component. So usually we break this up into the user interface components and the content components. So for the user interface, you're able to translate things like form elements and menu items and taxonomy terms. And as you're customizing the site and adding new text to the user interface, you need to be able to add these translations in. So that's all done through the user interface. Translations can just be added through a form in the Drupal system. You can also manage English and French versions of each piece of content in the system. So if you have a page with a title and a bunch of text, then you'd be able to translate those elements. And as you add more types of content to your site, you can make those bilingual as well. So you can add in the bilingual support to each new type of content that you add to the system. Something that people often want to add on top of that is a workflow for content translation. So again, each organization tends to be a bit different for workflow, but as soon as content's added to the site, you want to make sure that it's translated before it gets published. And then the other requirement is usually that when content gets updated in one language, those updates don't get published until the translation is updated as well. So you can use the workflow tools in the system to add a workflow for content translation. Another really useful feature of the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit are landing pages. So when you first install the system, or if you're looking at a website that uses this tool, you'll see that the home page has all these columns with different content in them. And this is a type of landing page. And in Drupal, behind the scenes, it's using a system called panels to put this into place. And how this works is that this is a page that an editor or an author can come along and edit and customize. And they can customize not only the content of the page, but also the layout. So you can see on this page, if you're looking at the slides, you can see that there's these two links: customize this page, change this layout. And those are buttons you can use as an editor to customize the page you're looking at. So the user interface for this is very nice. It's really optimized for editors to be easy, relatively easy to use. So you can drag and drop content to different regions on this page, and you can add new content, and you can go in and change the layout pretty easily. So it's a user interface tool for changing the layout of pages, changing the positioning of content, and creating landing pages that are exciting to users and really appealing. So this whole system is built into the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, and it's used to implement pages like the home page, but also could be a page to display a list of events, or a page to promote a certain campaign. There's lots of use cases that you'll find for dynamic pages like this. So you'll notice that this is a landing page that's pulling in content from different places on the site. So you have videos and you have headlines, and you could customize this as you add your own types of content, as you have content coming from different parts of the site, different sections. You can use landing pages to aggregate that all together and display it in a way that users are going to see an overview of the site or an overview of the section of the site. So it's a really powerful content management tool, and it's implemented in the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit in such a way that it's following the front-end guidelines for the markup of the content and the accessibility of the content. So the last feature that I'll talk about in this section is the implementation of the Government of Canada look and feel. So as you're installing this system, there's an option for which theme you want to use on the site, and there's a theme for the Web Experience Toolkit that you choose. And there's actually a few versions of this theme. So there's the theme that's meant to be used for public users of the site. It's called the Internet version. And there's also an intranet version that's slightly different, that's optimized more for intranets. And both of these versions of the theme, they're implementing the look and feel. They have the branding of the Government of Canada, so you can see that this one has the maple leaf and the Canada, is it called the logo? And then there's the word mark. So there's all these elements here that are defining the look and feel, and these are really visual elements. But there's also some things that are less visual that are going on in the front end of the site. So if you tried resizing the page, you'd see that this look and feel, the front end of this site is responsive. So the look and feel changes when you're looking at the site on a mobile device or a tablet device, and you see all of a sudden these little buttons for looking at the menu or doing a search or changing the settings. So you have built into the site, you have this responsive look and feel. So as the site changes, the look and feel is the same, but the implementation is a bit different. So the menu is implemented in a way that's optimized for mobile. And so this is really important to make the site accessible to people who are viewing it on a mobile device. And if you're going and customizing the look and feel at all, you need to keep in mind that this is there and you need to maintain this. So you need to make sure that if you added another menu to this website, you want to make sure that that's responsive as well. So it can be a difficult thing to do if you do need to customize the look and feel. But the fact that it's built into the core is really useful. Also in the front end of the site, there's a mega menu. That's an example of one of the features of this site that is accessible. So accessibility is a really important component of any government website. And every time you're adding a new user interface element, you have to think about how this information is going to be accessible to people who can't necessarily access the site just by looking at it. So the mega menu is accessible using keyboard shortcuts, but it's this drop-down menu that has columns and different sets of links in it. So it's a fairly complex menu, but it's also an accessible menu. And the mega menu is the main menu that's used to put links to most of the pages on the website. But there are other menus that you can use as well. There's menus in the footer and the sidebar. So there's a whole menu system built into Drupal that the site uses to help users navigate and find the content they're looking for. So I didn't get a chance to talk about all the features of this distribution. There's too many of them to really fit into a 1-hour webinar, but I just tried to cover some of the highlights. There's also a search tool built in that you can use to help users search for content if you have a lot of content on your website. I'll just check if there's questions before I move on to the next section. Everyone can still hear me? I'm always worried with webinars. Okay, great. So I've been talking about all the features of this distribution and what you're going to get, and I've been painting this beautiful sunny picture of the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution. And now I want to talk more about what's underneath and how you can customize it. And also some of the challenges, because it is a very complex system, and if you're going to be using it to implement a website, you'll certainly run into parts that are difficult to integrate with. So to start off, the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution is a version of Drupal. So you can download it from drupal.org/project/webkit. And that is going to give you Drupal core, which is, like I said before, this very flexible content management system. And it's also going to give you a whole set of other components. So you're going to get a very large download, and it's going to include Drupal core, which is relatively small, and then all these other components. And these are just some examples. So this isn't a full listing of all the components. There's hundreds of them, but this is some of the highlights, and just to show you the different types of components. So I have here modules. That's the first thing in the column next to Drupal core. So you have modules like panels, internationalization modules. So these are extra pieces of functionality that extend Drupal. And these are things that you could just download from Drupal.org yourself, but they come with this distribution to add on these pieces of functionality. So you've already seen, just in the slides that I just showed you, some the results of this functionality. So things like the WYSIWYG editor, the being able to edit the landing pages, all of that is coming from these extra modules that are added on to Drupal core. You also have some themes. There's two main themes that come with the distribution. You have WetKit Omega and the Ember theme for administering the site. So the WetKit Omega theme is to change the look of the front end of the site. And then there's also a theme for administrators. So as you're editing content and customizing the site, you'll have a theme for that as well. So those are to change the look and feel. Then you have whole sets of configuration. So these are configuration settings that are already in place. So the fact that the website is already going to be in English and French, that's a whole set of configuration that's been done so that that's the case. So you already have a lot of settings enabled for each content type so that it's going to be in English and French. You have configuration around the WYSIWYG editor and around the menus. And in Drupal lingo, those pieces of configuration are called features. So you have modules, themes, and features. These are all standard types of Drupal components, and this distribution comes with a whole bunch of them. And then you have another couple types of components that are more specific to this distribution. There's user interface components. So you have all the CSS and JavaScript that comes with the Web Experience Toolkit. So whether you were using Drupal to implement this or another content management system, you'd need to have those files. So those files come as part of the download of the distribution. You also have some JavaScript libraries, so not custom JavaScript, but JavaScript that's used for lots of different web projects. So things like the WYSIWYG editor, the CK editor, that's a JavaScript library that just comes with the system. You also have translations of the user interface that come with it when you download the site. So the fact that all the user interface for all the forms in the site are already translated, that's because there's a translation file that comes with the distribution. And then the final category I have here is content. When you're installing this distribution, there's a checkbox to choose to install the sample content, which is usually a good idea if you're doing this for the first time, because then you'll have something to look at when you're browsing through the website. So you have some sample pages there. You have sample landing pages, like that home page I was showing you. That's just a sample of what the home page could look like. And you also have translations of all the sample pages and all the sample landing pages. So along with the English content, you have the French content. So you have translations for everything. So that's what this looks like when you download it. And if you're actually looking at the files, if you're used to looking at Drupal, or you've downloaded Drupal before and you're wondering what's different, all of these WetKit components are located under Profiles WetKit, and that's where you'll find all the components I just talked about. So all the ones in dark blue here, all those squares, those represent components that are located in this Profiles WetKit section. So the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things about using this distribution, is figuring out where everything comes from, because there's all these components. So I'll just talk about that for a minute. The first thing I talked about was modules, the fact that the distribution comes with modules. So those modules come from Drupal.org, and there's actually documentation for a lot of that on Drupal.org. So if you're having trouble with the translation system, The translation modules come from Drupal.org, so you'll be able to find some documentation for them there. And each module has settings and adds different functionality to different parts of the site. So mapping that functionality to those modules, figuring out where all the functionality came from, that's a big part of understanding this system. So going through the list of modules is a good first step for that if you're actually the one implementing the website. And it's just important to know that there is a lot of configuration there. So it's not just because you have all this functionality that comes out of the box, it's not like it's all just going to work the way you want it to. There's been some configuration added, but you'll always have to make some changes. The second big component or type of component that I was talking about are the themes. So the themes change the look and feel of the site and add layouts. And those integrate with the WetKit files, so the WetKit CSS and JavaScript files. So you also have the configuration features, all the configuration that's been done on the site to set it up to be at this great multilingual website. And what's important to know about the configuration is that you can go in and change it. So there's default configuration that comes with the site, assuming you have a certain set of content types, a certain set of needs for your WYSIWYG editor, a certain set of menu items, but all of that you can change. So this is a content management system, so a lot of the changes are made in the user interface, where you can go in and configure settings for the different modules and the different components. And so configuration is a huge part of what this website is. And all of that is stored in the database. It comes wrapped up in these features. Features are in code, but really in any content management system, configuration changes end up in the database. So that's just something to keep in mind. The distribution, like I said, it comes with CSS and JavaScript files from the Web Experience Toolkit. Those are compressed files, so it can sometimes be a little bit hard to debug issues and figure out what's going on with those files. So the website for the Web Experience Toolkit is a great resource because it has the full files, it has some documentation around those. So that's an important place to look. And there's also a file called fr.po, which is the PO file that has all the translations that come with the site. And all those translations you can override in the system. And finally, like I said, during the installation, you can choose to install the sample content. And that's something that you'll want to delete before launching your site, obviously, but it's good to see an example of what you have. So it's great that we have this distribution. Now you understand a bit more of what it is and what the components are, but really the heart of the matter is customizing it, and this is where the work comes in. After the work of figuring out what it is that you're going to customize, you actually have to do the work of customizing. So I showed you, I think in my first slide, this equation, Drupal core plus WetKit equals Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, and it looks very simple. But then the other part of this equation is adding in all of your content, adding in the functionality that you have based on your requirements, and your own information architecture. So if you have a big database of let's say, users on your site, or profiles of individuals or buildings or documentation pages, whatever it is, whatever content you have, there's going to be a lot of information architecture around it, a lot of customization that needs to be done to this system to get your content online. And then any requirements you have for being able to navigate to this content, being able to interact with the content if there's more functionality there. And you can see here that your website can look quite different. So once you've enabled a certain theme and put in your content and put in those features, your site is going to come out looking like a version of the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, but it'll look different. So here's what that might look like in terms of the architecture. For each of these components that come with the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, you'll be adding components on your own. And you might not add all of these things depending on what type of site you have and how complex it is, but you'll certainly be adding most of these things. So on top of Drupal core, on top of the modules that come with the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit, you'll want to add some extra modules. I'm sure of it. So if you have requirements for access control, or you have requirements for who exactly can edit which pieces of content, there's all kinds of functionality that you might want to put into this system that's not there. And there are lots of modules on Drupal.org, extra pieces of functionality that you can download and add to this system. So it's a very modular system, and even though there's a lot of functionality out of the box, you're going to find places where you need to add additional functionality. So for example, if your website needs to have an e-commerce component, that is something that you could add. There's a commerce module you could go and download and add to the system. You're also likely to want to add some custom look and feel. So if you have a really specific implementation of search or of your custom e-commerce features that you just added to the site. These are things that might have to have extra design around them. There might be a slightly different look and feel. There might be different responsive actions that might have to happen if the user changes the screen size. So any customizations you want to make to the front end of the site, even if it's just a little bit of CSS, you can easily implement that using a custom theme, a custom sub-theme. So that's a theme is a look and feel component that you're adding on top of what's already there. So you have this Government of Canada look and feel. You want to keep all of that, and you just want to make some little adjustments. So that would be a sub-theme that you'd be adding. And then the real work comes, I think most of the work that you're going to do to customize the site comes in this configuration section. So you have already menus set up and content types set up, but you'll want to extend that by adding additional custom content types. You'll also want to add more user roles. So you have already an editor role and an administrator role, but you might have several types of editors for different types of content. You're certainly going to want to customize components of the user interface, like the name of the site, and add in the translations for all those custom components. And this section, configuration, for every type of content that you add, for every type of user interface element that you want to add, this becomes really a lot of configuration that you're adding on top of a complex system. So the goal is to make it consistent with what's already there and to be able to keep in all the features that you already have, the fact that the website is bilingual, the fact that it's responsive and accessible. The next section, user interface elements. So you already have all these components from the Web Experience Toolkit. You already have the translations of the user interface. there's a typo here in my slide. It says custom content types. It should say custom translations. So you might want to override the translations that have been added to this distribution already. And if you're adding more user interface elements like different breadcrumbs or new form elements, those are things that you'll need to translate as well. And finally, content. So content is really at the core of this platform, and you'll certainly have a lot of content to add to the site before you launch it as part of this process of creating your website in this system. And content are pages of content, but you also have to add things like these landing pages, and that can take quite a bit of work to think through how the landing pages are going to be structured, what content they're going to have, what layout they're going to have, how users are going to interact with them. And of course, for every piece of content, you need to be adding in a translation. So first of all, thinking through what has to get translated on this page, and then having the translators be able to enter those translations. So as you're customizing this site, this platform that you have, your primary goal in your head is probably the requirements that you have for the website. You're probably thinking, okay, I need to display all this content to users. I need to have these different components on all these pages, and you're thinking through the communication challenge of making a website. But on top of that, you have additional goals, additional challenges, which are to maintain the accessibility of the site, to make sure it's still responsive, that it's still bilingual, because every time you add a customization or add a new component, you risk losing all that. So the real challenge in customizing this platform is making sure that you're staying consistent. And then the other challenge is remembering that new versions of software come out all the time. And so this distribution is no different. And there's going to be updates to Drupal core. There's going to be updates to all the modules and themes and features that come with this distribution. And so extending it correctly so that you can update it when you need to is really key. So basically, the goal is to keep things consistent with how they're done. If you're looking at the existing content types and the existing configuration, you want to be careful about changing things too much or breaking that consistency, because every time you do, it'll be harder to update the core distribution itself. So that's the main gist of my presentation, and I'll just show you. There's a resources slide here with 3 links. I'll put these slides up online so you can see them and click on the links. But basically, it's a link to the Web Experience Toolkit page, so you can see documentation about that. There's also a link to the GitHub page for the Drupal Web Experience Toolkit distribution. So there's a lot of documentation and issues there around this distribution. And finally, the Drupal.org link to download it and try it out yourself. And then there's information there about the status of the project and all of that. It's a project that is just finally, I think, getting a full release any moment now. And so that's something to keep an eye on, that page, because any updates to the code will show up there. So I want to make sure I have time for questions. Does anyone have questions? I know I covered a lot of ground in a very short time. There's a chat at the bottom of your GoToWebinar screen, so you should be able to type in questions there. Does everyone have access to that? I'm worried that people can't actually type into it because I don't see anyone with questions. If you want to address just me, you can put in a message and put organizers only, and only I'll see it if you want. Okay. I don't see anyone with questions. I guess this must have been either a very good presentation or a very overwhelming one. So just to give a bit more information, I'm doing a 2-day training on this distribution on January 16th and 17th, and that's in Ottawa. So that'll be a walkthrough of how to customize the distribution for your project from a site building perspective. So if you want to learn how to actually check the checkboxes and configure the site to do all the things that I just talked about, I just described, that training will guide you through all of that. So how to set up new content types and keep them multilingual, how to add different workflows and add different types of users on your site, different permissions for different users, all that kind of thing we'll be doing on those 2 days. So that's January 16th and 17th. I'm also doing, someone at Evolving Web is doing a training on December 16th and 17th around module development. So if you have custom functionality that you need to add into Drupal, if you want to integrate Drupal with an external system, if you want to import content into Drupal in using best practices, any of that, we will be covering in a training on December 16th and 17th in Ottawa. So that's for module development. And then in February, there's a Drupal theming training. So that's if you want to be able to customize the look of the website. So that's meant for people who know some HTML and CSS and need to be able to change the look of their Drupal site, add different layouts, and that type of thing. So for information about all of those trainings, you can go to evolvingweb.ca/training, and I'll send out a follow-up email with that link, as well as a link to these slides. And hopefully there'll be a recording of this online if you want to go back and listen again to any of the sections or share it with any of your colleagues who couldn't come.